Jamaica from its grey list of countries that are assessed as having deficiencies in their anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism regimes. But what does this mean for Jamaica? And how will it impact our investments and our overall economic landscape? Hi, I'm Shaquille Rochester Shorter and welcome to Finance Matters. Joining us to discuss this is Mr. Keenan Faulkner, economist at the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow the Ministry of Finance on Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, TikTok, and now Threads to see all the episodes and highlights. Mr. Faulkner, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Shaquille.
All right, so why were we placed on this grey list in the first place, and what does it mean for Jamaica to be removed?
So we were placed on the grey list because it was determined that we were not sufficiently compliant with all of the recommendations. When we had our last mutual evaluation review in 2017, we had only by then met 23 of the 40 recommendations.
23?
Just 23. And so by the end of it, recently we bumped that up to 37, which was enough for them to take us off the grey list now before the next round of evaluations in 2026. As to why we were placed on the grey list, there's a measure called M3, which measures all of the money in the economy. Now, relative to our size, it was found that there's a lot of money in the economy that we need to properly account for all of these transactions.
Okay.
And so we were not able to satisfy that requirement. And so we now had to develop an action plan to show FATF that we are committed to being compliant with all of these recommendations. And now we only have 3 outstanding. Those 3 relate to the non-profit sector, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to ensure that we're not financing terrorism, as well as virtual assets, which includes things like cryptocurrencies and things like that.
So, Mr. Faulkner, it seems as if there's a plan to achieve this. But what procedures or measures are put in place for Jamaica to be removed?
Well, there would have been a lot of work done by the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee, but in particular, you had to have different legislative amendments because everything boils down to what are the regulations that govern financial transactions. So you had amendments to the Companies Act, you had regulations being introduced for the microcredit sector, those micro lenders that will give you a day loan. Those all now had to come under some sort of regulatory regime and the jurisdiction of the Bank of Jamaica.
Okay.
You also had regulations relating to what are called designated non-financial businesses and professions. So that brings in a lot of persons into the net, in particular members of the legal profession who now had to have additional reporting requirements for the monies that would come in from their clients, for example. And so all of those regulatory regimes related to different legislative reforms, that work had to be undertaken, had to be carried to Parliament, had to be passed through Parliament, and had to be promulgated. That now this is the direction we're heading in to be able to cover all financial transactions of any nature.
So we're now removed from the grey list, right?
Right.
How, on a grander scale, how will this positively impact Jamaica's investment opportunities and by extension the economy?
Well, it makes doing business easier. So international entities now feel more comfortable doing business with Jamaica because we are not, listed as being deficient in our compliance. We're not an international pariah when it comes on to doing business. Just recently, a local commercial bank would have announced, for example, that they are going to introduce payment providers like Apple Pay and Samsung Pay and things like that. And it's only because they now feel more confident doing business in Jamaica. You talk about correspondent banking. Local banks need to have correspondent banks overseas in order to carry out different transactions. Now they are saying, all right, because you're not on the grey list anymore, it's safer to do business with you. And that only helps to generate more investment. It also will tend to bring down the cost of capital over time. Since it's now easier to do business, you have less onerous regulatory requirements to navigate. And that helps to boost investment. Ultimately, it also increases our credit worthiness. And if our credit worthiness goes up, then you start to see rates coming down on different financial products like mortgages, car loans, business loans. So that's what it means really at the macro level, and for the consumer at the micro level.
Okay, this sounds like an awesome thing for Jamaica.
Yeah.
Tell me, how will this recent action, the removal, affect regular Jamaicans and, for example, remittance agencies?
Yeah, so now, when you have to go to a remittance agency and you have to answer these questions, which might seem very cumbersome, these additional questions they're asking, what are you doing with the money and things like that.
And the relationship between the sender and the receiver.
Right, so we can start to, over time, relax some of those requirements. And in relaxing those requirements, it makes it easier to transact business. You would have something called additional customer due diligence, because they had to kind of shine the microscope on you and really ensure that this money is not being used for money laundering or financing terrorism.
Yes.
Over time, we can now redo some of these requirements to make it a little easier for consumers. When you send money or receiving money from abroad, they'll ask you fewer questions. For example, but the one that most persons are probably looking out for when you're doing online transactions, online retailers, the people who do online shopping, they know previously there would have been a hesitance to accept cards that are domiciled in Jamaica. Once they see Jamaica, they just block the transaction.
Yes.
Now they are now going to relax those over time. They can say, okay, Jamaica is not on the grey list. We can now accept these transactions. We were on the brink of being locked out of the global financial system. Nobody wants to do business with you, but now we're pulled away from the brink and we're heading in the other direction.
So, Mr. Fauna, I just want to touch back on a point you made earlier, that we're at 37 recommendations and the actual goal is to be at 40. Do you think that's attainable for Jamaica?
Yeah, that's definitely attainable as we continue to go through the different legislative processes related to, as I said, the non-profit sector, the regulation of virtual assets, as well as the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Now, those three we were not able to achieve in time for this round in 2024. But for the next 2 years now, before the next plenary, we definitely should be able to achieve it with the work being done by the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee.
Well, on that note, Mr. Fauna, thank you for coming on our program today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaki.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Finance Matters. Remember to follow us on social media at MOF Jamaica and tune in next week as we continue to demystify the economic and fiscal policies and initiatives implemented by the government to empower Jamaicans as we chart a path to Jamaica's economic prosperity.